Well, it's Friday the 9th of August. The wheel is turning fast. Venus in Leo, trine Jupiter retrograde in Sagittarius. I have a small window up to the 11th to overcome my biggest challenges, which always seem to be prison bars fortified by my own inaction. This is episode 1919 of 301 Permanently Moved Online, a personal podcast 301 seconds in length, written, recorded, and edited in 1 hour by me at the J. I was on a weird one this week. Follow along with me on an info binge that took me from William Blake to the first imagining of an air-to-surface missile. For my birthday, Mr. Ben Vickers gave me a pamphlet called William Blake's Mystic Map of London by artist and author Louisa Albini. The book takes Blake's work and builds a map of London and demonstrates with wonderful art that Blake really is the OG psychogeographer. The book makes it clear that whilst Blake's work is deeply infused with spiritual significance, he was not an isolated mystic. He was a native Londoner, politically and socially aware of the world around him. He witnessed poverty and social injustice and wrote about it, mindful of the mind-forged manacles that he saw as imprisoning the human spirit. Having finished it on a mystic poetry kick, I finally read Tennyson, an occultist, as his writings prove, by A.P. Sinnett, published in 1920 by the London Theosophical Publishing House. The introduction has some real zingers in it, like, quote, the self-sufficient skeptic, or ignoramus, who challenges every occult writer to bring him proofs of this or that statement that he cannot accept, fails to understand that it is not worth the while of the occultist to undertake his elementary education, end quote. Which is the sort of thing that I can hear Conor Habib saying on his podcast. Anyway, what's interesting about the book, given its publication date, is the brief discussion on the poem Locksley Hall, a piece modern writers point to as Tennyson peering through the looking glass, see episode 1915, to see the future. Tennyson says as much in the poem, dipped into the future far as the human eye could see, and he postulates a ghastly dew raining from the heavens as the nation's airy navies grapple in the central blue. You can well see why folks see glimpses of the horrors of the 20th century in this poem. A.P. Sinnett says that the only comment that he could get from Tennyson on the poem, by way of a séance, was the following quote. Tennyson's answer simply was, I regret that I wrote that, and put an end to further conversation on the subject. End quote. Wild. This book goes deep into Tennyson's occult imagery and also has some great UPG anecdotes from the author as asides. And now we take another leap, as I got interested in other visions of flying machines. I'm sure most of you know the Vimana in the Ramayana. I have a not so good conspiracy book on them. So instead, I turned to the book Rhetoric and Reality in Air Warfare, the evolution of British and American ideas about strategic bombing, 1914 to 1945, which I originally bought for the great chapter on the 1899 Hague Convention and America's insistence on holding the door open for strategic bombing, as technology would eventually allow them, they argued, to bomb things very accurately, very pertinent given the US's current arguments on the efficacy of drone strikes. By this book, I also ended up reading E. Mills' dubious The Decline and Fall of the British Empire the next day, which reads like a UKIP brand written in 1905, but I digress. The strategic bombing book then took me to Johannes Kepler's Somnium, a novel written in 1608. In the narrative, an Icelandic boy and his witch mother learn of an island named Livana, or moon, from a demon. Somnium also presents the first description of how the Earth might look when viewed from the moon, and I'd never heard of it. The text I found describes a man being shot from a cannon into space to the moon, which reads like an interstellar cryopod. Quote, therefore, he must be put to sleep beforehand with narcotics and opiates, and he must be arranged limb by limb so that the shock will be distributed over the individual's members. I also then went on to find The Aerial Ship, written in 1670 by Jesuit monk Francesco Lana, which quite frankly reads like a real prophetic fever dream. Quote, where is the man who can fail to see that no city would be proof against surprise, as the ship could be at any time steered over its squares or even its courtyards of dwelling houses and brought to earth for the landing of its crew, or even, without descending, iron weights could be hurled, fireballs and bombs, houses, fortresses and cities could thus be destroyed, with the certainty that the airship could come to no harm, as the missiles could be hurled from such a vast height. Lana, however, dismissed the idea of airships, stating that God would never surely allow such a machine to be successful, since it would create many disturbances in the civil and political governments of mankind. I ended up my info binge that began with Blake at a short story called The Angel of the Revolution by George Griffin, which is the first recorded imagining of an air-to-surface missile, and its OG steampunk story set on a steam airship published in Pearson's Weekly 1893. There was a sharp but not very loud sound as the compressed air was released. Something rushed out of the muzzle of the gun, and a few seconds later, Colston, could see the missile boring its way through the air and pursuing a slanting but perfectly directed path for the center of the fortress.